Welcome to another edition of Need for Courage. I'm your host today, John Byrne. And with me today is Lindsey St. Arnold Bell. Lindsey is the Executive Director for Near West Side Partners here in Milwaukee, a program that the Center for Peacemaking and others at Marquette University has partnered with over the years. And we're going to talk a bit about what that Near West Side does and how it's valuable from both not simply a peacemaking, peace building situation, but also how it helps residents and what the goals are. So first, Lindsey, thank you for doing this. Describe what Near West Side Partners is. I know you've been involved with them since roughly 2016, it's almost 10 years. Yeah. Now you're the executive director. What is it for people that aren't from Milwaukee that may not know about it?
Well, thank you first for having me. And Near West Side Partners is a nonprofit organization that is committed to community and economic development in the 7 neighborhoods just west of downtown Milwaukee. So our work really focuses around developing sustainable, vibrant commercial corridors, residential neighborhoods that support our neighbors and their housing needs, safe spaces for people to visit, to learn, to explore, to live, and then, of course, healthy spaces. Places where people can live their highest quality of life. What makes our organization really special is that we are founded by 5 major anchor institutions that share this geography. So that includes, of course, Marquette University, right. Aurora Sinai, Potawatomi Ventures, which is the non-gaming arm of the right. Forest County Potawatomi, and then Molson Coors and Harley-Davidson. So these are some of Wisconsin and really the nation's most recognizable brands, really key strategic players in the neighborhood. And it really helps us enhance the work that we do with neighbors who live here, with the employees that work here, and with the students that learn here.
So for those, again, that's a great explanation. The west side of Milwaukee, why are there challenges there? Because a lot of cities around the country, I'm sure, have similar issues that they're grappling with. What, for those that aren't familiar with Milwaukee, describe sort of the west side challenges, if you will.
It's a really interesting story, the history of the Near West Side. In the early development of Milwaukee, the Near West Side was where you found some of the grandest mansions. You know, Wisconsin Avenue was once Grand Avenue.
Right.
It's where our beer barons had their homes. And you can still see a lot of that development or a lot of those homes around the neighborhood. But over the course of the development of the city, we saw a couple of things that really had kind of a negative impact on the development. First and foremost was the construction of our freeways in our neighborhoods, kind of disconnecting us from the downtown areas and from our neighbors to the south. And then, of course, we saw kind of the divestment that came from different businesses and sectors. At one point, the Near West Side had over 9 hospitals functioning within the geography.
Wow.
And around those 9 hospitals grew housing that served the employees that lived there and the kinds of amenities that supported the employees and the visitors to those spaces. As those hospitals closed and consolidated, a lot of those spaces turned over to either vacant uses or not so savory uses. So over the course of the last 10 years, our organization has really been focused on leaning into the assets that we have here in the neighborhood, the things that are going really well, and then addressing the root causes and the perceptions of the area and taking that head on, not shying away from the fact that there's been a history of disinvestment, but thinking about how do we turn that around and how do we take what is already here that's already really good and lift that up.
What time frames are we talking about? So if you talk about 9 hospitals, this is over the course of how long? And then when were Near West Side Partners first formed? So the first question is, how long a period of time are we talking about? Because obviously you're saying the freeways were built, so this is a while back. So the Grand Mansion part of this was probably quite a while ago, right?
Yeah, Grand Mansion period, I think we could say probably 1880s, 1890s to the 1920s-ish. Mm-hmm. And I would say that period of disinvestment, probably 60s to 80s, roughly in there. So I think there have, of course, been major institutions that have stayed and have kind of invested and stuck through some of that turmoil that we saw, Marquette being one of them, of course. And then Harley and Molson and Aurora. So that we've certainly had people who stayed and institutions that stayed, but there was a period of time where leaving was the thing to do.
You mentioned when the freeways were built, I'm sure you're aware, probably even read the biography of Robert Moses in New York, who basically crafted everything there that really discriminated against people of color and poor people and set up a transportation system that to this day people still struggle. So obviously that concept was something that you mentioned here. In terms of, we'll talk a little bit later. I know you're involved with zoning issues with the county on committees and that sort of thing. Talk a bit about what legislators, state or local or even federal, what has been their role, if any, on some of the things that you guys are working on? Because I have to think part of when you're doing anything, we're trying to entice new businesses back or people to stay, that you want some support. So you want support from political leaders. How does that work? And not to name names, but just in general, how does that process work for you?
So government at every level has been a critical player in helping to advance a lot of our initiatives and our projects. From the very beginning of Near West Side, one of our first initiatives was to address some of the concerns around 27th and Wisconsin Avenue. And at that time, we had engaged the state of Wisconsin to look at building a new facility right on the corner and serving as an anchor to that area that at that point had...
A facility of what?
The Department of Children and Families.
Okay.
So a public serving facility in an area that served, or in an area that was really unanchored, didn't have a whole lot of activity happening at that point. From there, beyond developing, purchasing properties, investing into different projects, there have been different ways that the city, county, state, and even the federal government have been involved. More recently, I guess most recently, Near West Side Partners just received a $1.6 million grant from the Federal Highway Administration to carry out some planning work in neighborhoods along the 30th Street Industrial Corridor. And this is through their Reconnecting Communities pilot program. It's really focusing on reestablishing connections between neighborhoods that have been broken down because of major federal infrastructure projects. So this particular project will look at wealth building opportunities in 21 neighborhoods that surround the 30th Street Rail Corridor.
Okay.
And in anticipation of a future recreational trail that would connect the Near West Side north to Havenwood State Park. So there have been a lot of different ways that the government has played a role. And I think one of the strengths that an organization like Near West Side Partners can bring to a community is understanding how and when to pull in those players and the different skills and talents and how to best leverage that to achieve the vision of our neighbors.
It seems obvious based on what you've said, but what's the small s, the selling point of doing these improvements? How does what you folks are doing, whether it's through your strategies, your planning, you're working with governments, how does that improve the resident's life? I mean, like I said, some of it's obvious. You're getting businesses, so there's employment possibilities and obviously access to services that you wouldn't have before. So when you're making the case, look, you may not live in the Near West Side, but if we do X, Y, and Z, here's how it's going to improve the whole community. Some of that should be obvious to people, but just in case it's not, what's your elevator pitch on how important this is?
Strong, stable neighborhoods are great for the people who live there. They're also great for people who want to visit them, who want to work there, who want to do business there. And I think as we approach this work, we are really thinking about how do we make it sustainable in the long term. It is easy, with it in quotes, to invest money and to sink money into places. But if you don't have an underlying infrastructure,
Right.
if you have not spent time working with the neighbors that are already there, engaging them in the process, understanding what their experience has been in the past, understanding what their vision is for the future, all that investment won't get you too far. So I think the benefit of an organization like Near West Side Partners is we create that foundation that investment can grow and thrive in. And we know then it can be sustainable long term. You are not sinking your precious resources into a place where it won't last.
Right. What sort of support, besides the interest in improving the community, do you get from residents? So when you communicate what you're doing, obviously you want to get policymakers to support it. You want business leaders to support it. How challenging, if at all, is it to get local residents to either be part of what you're trying to do, or at least use them as a sounding board? So maybe it's surveys, maybe it's door-to-door conversations, because that's you need buy-in. I can't think of anybody that wouldn't want improvement, but how does that work?
So one of the biggest things that we do that really helps to inform our work is our annual resident survey. So every year we go door to door, we survey residents on a whole host of items that help to guide our work and the interventions that we do. I think that the key here is 10 years ago, we were not looking the way we were today. There was a lot of distrust among our residents. And a lot of the work that we did in those first 5 years was demonstrating our continued willingness to show up, to talk, to have difficult conversations, to hear things that were hard to hear at times from neighbors. And I think that time spent has helped us go a lot further, a lot faster. Once neighbors heard that not only are we interested in hearing what you have to say, but we are going to take what you say, we're going to repeat it back and say, is this right? Did we get this? We're going to co-create interventions that we can work on together. Some of those things we may lead, some of them our anchors may lead. There may be opportunities for our residents to lead. And then we're going to come back and say, did we get this right? Do we need to modify? And we've done that again and again and again over the last 10 years. And that demonstration of not just we're listening, but we're doing has really helped us build trust.
What's been the interaction with law enforcement? Because obviously in some parts of any city, there's going to be either a fear or a reluctance of working with local law enforcement. How supportive have they been from a policy perspective, and how important is their, I don't even want to say buy-in, but their involvement to making what you're doing successful?
We have partnered with law enforcement from the very beginning of Near West Side Partners. So from MPD, Milwaukee Police Department, to Marquette University Police Department, which was formed right around the same time. They've been critical partners. And I think the interesting thing about community development is there's this dichotomy. There is a distrust of law enforcement, and that's real. But there is also a recognition of the need for law enforcement, and people want to see that there are police in their community, that they're taking seriously the issues that they have. I think the benefit of an organization like Near West Side Partners is we can serve as a bridge and help with the communications in both directions. So as we are talking to neighbors, if they are afraid to maybe bring something directly to law enforcement, we can help convey those messages in a way that provides them a little bit of protection and a little bit of ease, and still can help address that long-term issue. And the same from the law enforcement angle. The reality is there are confines on what police can do and should be engaged in. And sometimes that, means that things don't happen as quickly as people would like it to happen, or that some issues aren't best dealt with by law enforcement. And that's where we can come in and say, this is why this is happening. Let's think through some other solutions to address the issues that we're dealing with.
you might have, when you were talking about funding before, this might be maybe the name of this, but I want to ask you about two projects or two things. One is the HUD Choice Neighborhood Initiative Transformation Plan. What is that? And not to be political, but there have been issues because HUD is now run by a different administration. Just high level. Again, not asking you to comment on anything political, but just in general. First, what is it? And how does that help what you're doing?
Yeah. So HUD runs a Choice Neighborhood Initiative that essentially grants entities funds for two different purposes. One is the planning grant, which Near West Side Partners in Marquette received back in 2018.
Okay.
And that is really to look at how can we look at our public housing assets in the Near West Side, in a neighborhood like the Near West Side, and engage our residents in planning around the things that not only will make housing and their quality of life better within the building, but trickle out and look outside of those four walls into the community as a whole. So through that grant program, we were able to work directly with residents of our College Court public housing and talk about the things that they were experiencing within their buildings and the kinds of things they'd like to see outside. We were able to secure about $1 million in what they called action activity funds, which allowed us to take the ideas that we heard and put them into action. So we invested about $750,000 into facade improvements to buildings so that they could become tenant ready. We did some really unique artistic neighborhood markers to honor the history of our neighborhood.
I think I've seen some of those when Pat's driven me around. But
some great murals.
Yeah.
We instituted some traffic calming measures to make our streets safer to cross and more pleasant for people who are walking along our corridors. So there were a lot of things that we were able to do through that program. The second piece of funding that they offer through the Choice Neighborhood is the implementation. That is really looking at transforming public housing physically. And that is a place where, we think there is great opportunity for the federal government to be more engaged. I think if people understood the quality of some of the homes that we have, elderly folks living in, these are units that were built in the 60s.
Right.
They're not ADA compliant. We're dealing with a population that's already pretty vulnerable, and they're in spaces that are not conducive to a healthy and satisfying life. And without getting too political, I know that there have been major cuts to HUD programming over the course of the last year. And I think, as with all things, like an investment in public housing, it is an investment into all sorts of people.
Sure.
And it's not just urban populations, it's populations in rural settings as well. And when we lose that, we're really failing the most vulnerable in our communities.
Yeah, and policy makers have to be open to that, because that shouldn't be a partisan issue at all. If you can make these improvements, it improves everything. And business wants to be part of this. Educational opportunities open up, that sort of thing. So the other one is an initiative, the Concordia 27 Community Resource Hub. Yeah. It's a lot of words.
It is.
What is that? Tell us about that one.
Concordia 27, I like to call it the physical manifestation of Near West Side Partners' mission.
Okay.
So this was an initiative that was born out of a planning effort we held back in 2021. As we were coming out of COVID, we were really looking at what are the things that our neighborhood would like to see that could help accelerate work coming out of this kind of quiet period where we were really separated from one another. What we heard in that planning session was there was a desire for physical spaces where people could gather, where they could access different resources like job opportunities, affordable housing, where they could...
It's like a community center, right?
A community center, yeah. And what was really amazing was during this time, we had a chance to prototype some ideas. And the name Concordia 27, the location of Concordia 27, and some of the key partners all were identified during that initial planning session. Okay. So fast forward 18 18 months later, we were at the corner of 27th and Wells Street with the governor, Governor Tony Evers, announcing a $5 million investment into this idea. And today, we have a brand new $20 million redeveloped building that houses Near West Side Partners offices. Scaling Wellness in Milwaukee is there. Milwaukee Centers for Independence has a 12,000 square foot commercial kitchen where they're producing thousands of meals for schools and early childhood centers throughout the Milwaukee area. We have a local business, Fruition MKE, owned by Tiffany Miller, who is a resident of the Cold Spring Park neighborhood. And then we also have 33 units of affordable housing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But part of what makes this so special is in the heart of the building, we have community spaces. We have a large event room. We have a meeting room. So we are able to open our doors for all sorts of things. And I cannot understate how dramatically it has changed our ability to connect with people and do our work. From very simple things like the organic connections that we get when somebody knocks on the door and says, "Hi, what are you doing here?" to, more formal partnerships that we can take further, like our work with Axe Housing. They now host monthly homebuyer education centers at Concordia 27. So people are able to drop in and take these classes and get ready to buy a home. I'm really excited. We're taking this a little bit further. Next Friday, we are opening a pay what you can produce store that will be open twice a week in our space, really serving the entire community and addressing one of the biggest issues that we hear from our neighbors, which is access to fresh, healthy foods.
Wow. So much going on there. Before we let you go, I do want to ask you, you're involved with the county and zoning committee work, volunteer work. You've already outlined why zoning issues are so important. What sort of things are you trying to accomplish with your work with those committees and how that relates to the improvement of the area like you've been involved in?
Yeah, zoning matters are not always the most exciting things to talk about. Although
I have a good friend who was on a planning committee in Arlington, Virginia for 20 years. And through him, I learned how important all that was. So,
it is so important. Yeah. And when you start thinking about it, you can get real wonky. Everything we see in the Near West Side has been shaped by a zoning decision at one point or another.
Right.
And what we hear a lot now are issues around land use, specifically for businesses, for new developments. And I think what I see my role is really not just making sure that the legal criteria for these developments are met, but that the folks who are most impacted by it, the people who live there, the people who have their businesses in the area, that they understand how to plug in and the implications of something happening or not happening. I think we're very fortunate in Milwaukee to have a robust zoning code and, in the Near West Side in particular, older people who understand kind of how the zoning codes affect our ability to do work. And so it's a real pleasure to be part of all of that.
Lindsey, one final question for you. I know because I'm on your email list, so I do see the communication. How can people get more involved with the Near West Side, people that aren't, either they're at Marquette or they're just in the city or they're just in the state of Wisconsin and want to help improve all parts of Milwaukee? How can they get involved? What's a good resource or source information for the production of all that you're working on? The announcement of what's coming up in a couple of weeks is really exciting, but all the other things that you've been able to do, where can people get more information?
Well, I definitely recommend following us on social media. Be it LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. We have a pretty robust presence there. Okay. You can sign up for our newsletter at our website, nearwestsidemke.org. And, the thing about supporting the Near West Side is it can be as simple as going to a restaurant in the Near West Side, seeing a show at the Rave, doing a tour at the III Shrine Center. Just spending time here, having a
Right.
experience and getting to reintroducing yourself to the neighborhood helps our mission.
That's great advice, because you can donate, you can, get involved with committees, but just coming to the Near West Side just makes everything a lot better. So, Lindsey, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was great.